what we really wanted to do was to have a commission. This isn't the first time this commission has been authorized. Back in 1991 and 92, there was a similar commission. And what occurred then was a pecan farmer down in Peach County had a pipeline that ran through his property. And it leaked. And it killed many of his pecan trees and contaminated his water supply. And to add to that, he just happened to be a state representative. And they convened a similar commission. They did a study. And most of the laws we have today are a result of that. To say we copied it is probably accurate, but we thought a similar circumstance had arisen here. And what we wanted to do was to look at everything that's involved this time, because certainly technology has changed since 1994 when this into place. And I think from what I've heard and seen and discussed, our citizens' perspective on this has changed too. So before we do anything, we wanted to hear from people around the state. This bill put a moratorium on pipelines in Georgia until July 1st of next year. That would give this commission an opportunity to go around, hold public hearings, gather information, and make some decisions, and then the opportunity in next year's session of the legislature to move forward with legislation if it's deemed that something is necessary. So that's the basic facts. I can just tell you that from our perspective in the county that I represent, the two counties, there's some issues, and I talked about it. The legislature environmentally, Savannah River runs through my county on one side. It's the border with South Carolina. For years and years, about 15 years ago, we couldn't eat the fish out of there because of mercury contamination from upriver. About 4 years ago, the Geechee River borders our county on the other side, and we had the largest fish kill in the history of the state of Georgia by a manufacturing company up in Scriven County that released toxic chemicals into the water. Many of the people have been scared to drink the water, and they're scared of contamination. They use both rivers for a lot of things, and there's been a hue and cry, and we think this was a good opportunity to bring it to the surface and to allow citizens to have their say. So that's what we're going to do here today.
I am want to just kind of give you, kind of a 10, 20,000 foot look at pipelines kind of in general, just to kind of give you an idea of what, the pipelines, what they mean to the oil and natural gas industry and kind of how we look. So let's get started. This first slide, you can see pipeline infrastructure is a critical element of the oil supply chain. I've highlighted kind of the areas of the pipeline. You can kind of see that they're used to transport crude oil from the fields to short-term storage and then to refineries. And then from the refineries, some of it goes to the terminal, which eventually makes it to the point of sale, which is where the consumer picks it up at the gas station, or either it's delivered to an airport, or either it goes down to manufacturing feedstock. The U.S. has the largest network of oil and natural gas pipelines of any country in the world. Right now, they're about a half a million miles of natural gas and petroleum liquid transmission lines in the U.S. That's enough to wrap around the earth 20 times. As you can see from that map, that's the U.S. These are the major pipelines. Now, if you start looking at a lot of the natural gas pipelines, which we aren't focusing on, the map, there's a lot more on here, but these are just kind of really more of the major pipelines we're talking about. Why pipelines? Well, pipelines, the only feasible method for transporting the vast quantities of petroleum products that America requires. They're safe and efficient, they're highly cost effective. Replacing even a modest-sized pipeline, and I'm talking about maybe a 20-inch pipeline, would require 750 tanker truckloads per day at a frequency of one load every 2 minutes, working around the clock. I want to say in 2014 we shipped 16 billion barrels of oil throughout the pipelines here in the U.S. To give you an idea, there's just a ton of gas and crude oil moving through the pipelines under the ground across the nation. How do pipelines work? There are a number of different products that are shipped through the pipelines. They use centrifugal pumps to move the liquid through the pipe. Some very incredibly intelligent gentlemen that came up with the principles of hydraulics and figured out how they can put these batches into the pipeline and get them here to the delivery points and separate them. Product moves at approximately 3 to 8 miles per hour, depending on the size of the pipe, line pressure, and the density and the viscosity of the liquid being transported. This slide shows a little graph, kind of what a batch looks like in a typical pipeline. You can see you've got your different fuels, the premium, the regular, your home heating oil, as well as jet fuel and diesel fuel. That's kind of how the batches work. They ship it kind of stacked on top of each other like that down the pipeline, and then when they get it to the terminal, they can pull it out and keep, for the most part, everything is separated except for those interface areas and the transmix, and most of the terminals can actually take that out, break it apart, and put it in the proper tanks. Maintaining pipeline operations. The industry does a lot to work on prevention, mitigation, and response. There's constant monitoring of the pipelines. Some of those monitoring are, sometimes it's just somebody watching, around the clock watching from a computer control room. Other times it's air inspections from airplanes, or we're actually starting to use drones sometimes along the pipeline routes. Other times it's folks out there walking the pipeline routes looking for any type of easement or encroachments or anything like that. We do, there's mitigation and response. We're constantly working with safety and emergency responders to stay up to date and on top of any emergencies that might occur, just so everybody's kind of on the same page and, is used to the drill. These are just some pictures, if you will, of some of the different ways. We have internal inspection tools called Smart Pigs. We might go in and do some recoding in certain areas. Aerial patrols, we have signs, the control room, all that kind of stuff. It really there's a number of different things that the industry does on a regular basis to make sure that we keep this important part of our energy infrastructure running safely and as efficiently as possible. From the regulatory oversight, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, kind of oversees pipelines regarding rates. The Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is part of the USDOT, kind of looks over, regulates us for safety. We also work with the Environmental Protection Agency and OSHA and various other state and federal entities. And I do want to point out that we work extremely closely with the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security, because most of our pipelines are a very critical part to our energy infrastructure, and in some cases could be a target for terroristic attack and stuff like that. So usually when stuff goes down, our folks are on high alert regarding kind of national security. In summary, as you can see, pipelines are a critical element of the oil supply chain. They're the safest way to transport large amounts of petroleum products. Our regulatory oversight, you can see, is both on the federal and the state levels, and you can also see that Georgia has a long history with petroleum pipelines. They've been around for a long time. They've been servicing the industries here in the state for a long time. And supplying all the folks, all the motorists of the state of Georgia. So, with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I was told that right now, because there is no pipeline that goes from Augusta down to Savannah down to the coast, that there is some of this product brought in through the port on ships. I guess you basically put it on a ship over in Texas and Louisiana, and you float it around Florida, as our port of Savannah. And so from there, it has to be put on trucks and taken inland.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the other way you get oil to that part of our state where there's not pipelines is that you got to put it on trucks in Macon, I guess, or wherever the terminals
Macon,
are,
Augusta kind of area,
and bring them down that way. So the question was asked to me, okay, if we did run this pipeline off the existing pipeline, would the bringing of oil into the port dry up a little bit, so to speak, because now you have a more or less expensive way to supply it to that area? And it was asked for this reason, because the arteries that supply oil to Georgia, one of being coming through the port, purportedly, I was told, increased to bring in more to substitute for the pipeline being broke. In other words, there's a second distribution method and point there. The question was, would those dry up, so to speak, when the pipeline came off, so that if you had a big break in those two pipelines, you would have less oil in that part of Georgia or not? I didn't know the answer to that. I don't even know if you know the answer to that, but it was poised to.
Well, I was gonna say, considering that Mr. Chandler on the committee is the operator of that port facility, and he and I were actually chatting earlier, and he said, you know, their volumes already are up, right now, and a couple 6 weeks ago, a couple months ago, that first pipeline incident, I know they were bringing in a lot more product than what they used to do, and it was being trucked all over the place. It's hard to say, you know, I don't know exactly how much, if that new pipeline was put in, how much product they would be pulling out of it, you know, to service that area. It's just kind of hard to tell, you know, at this stage, especially with that project, you know, a lot of the details really not being known because it really didn't get to that point, you know, exactly what kind of impact it would have. But no, I mean, in an emergency situation, from talking to Mr. Chandler, I know that they have the ability to bring in additional product into the port to help service, you know, or help combat the shortage of supply that we might have due to, you know, the plantation line or the colonial line being out. Commission.
Thank you.
My question is, as this volume runs down from Augusta to Savannah and down the coast, why is it that it was not going to show us any difference? What was the purpose then? Because my big question is, sometimes I don't happen to Bill because he has much more influence than I do, but sometimes the difference in the cost of gasoline is huge. From one spot 30 miles away from me, 15, 20 cents different, and all of that. What was going to be the benefit if this pipeline had come through?
Well, let me start out by saying that I don't work for the company that was trying to put the pipeline in, and I don't know some of those details and their inner business, you know, models and pricing and all that kind of stuff. I do know across the board, shipping product via pipeline is cheaper than shipping it via truck, you know, or even train for that matter, just because, you know, when you start, if you do it via truck or other modes of transportation, a lot of times those are powered by fuel. You know, you got to have the diesel fuel to fill up the truck so it can carry that tanker full of gasoline to the station. So it's hard for me to really answer that question, Representative Williams. You know, maybe the folks at the company that was trying to put in this pipeline saw an opportunity, or they're maybe under their pricing models. You know, it's just kind of hard to say. You know, I'm just really not qualified to answer that question.
And I can tell you that Georgia and South Carolina are the only states in the nation currently considering legislation as far down the road as we've gotten. So the rest of the United States is actually watching us right now, which is kind of exciting. But so there have been differing changes in eminent domain. Georgia was one of the last in the United States to actually even allow eminent domain for pipelines. We just started that about 40 years ago, and then in the 90s we took a big step back. So Georgia's actually had a long history of kind of saying, wait, we don't want these things here, or not necessarily we don't want the pipelines here, we don't think you should be able to take our land in order to put it in. The other thing that I wanted to address was natural gas versus petroleum. Why is the regulation different? And I learned that yesterday. So natural gas cannot be transported unless it's being transported by pipeline. It can't be transported by truck. So that's why you saw the federal regulation step in and allow the eminent domain. You can ship it by ship, but not by truck. Petroleum has always had a mix of diversity of transport. So you've had trucks, you've had ships, and you've had pipelines, which is why you haven't seen more of a push of eminent domain being allowed for petroleum pipelines. That we all have heard about is Dakota Access in North Dakota. I went there for 10 days, and I went there not to help anybody on either side, but to try and learn exactly what's going on. And I will tell you, this is my take home. One, if you do not have the proper regulation in place and citizens feel like their voice is not going to be heard, then you're going to have that type of reaction. What's happening in North Dakota is not just happening in North Dakota. You've got people now standing in the way of the Sable Pipeline. You've got people in Pennsylvania that are being arrested in vast quantities, New Jersey and New York. Why are they in those areas? Because that's where we produce petroleum, right? You have Louisiana and Texas has its little pocket. Pennsylvania is where the petroleum, the entirety of petroleum started in the United States, in Pennsylvania, and now you've got this new birth of petroleum being found in North Dakota with the Bakken. So that's why you're having the issues in just those pocket areas, because that's where the pipelines exist. So I think it is very good that we are taking time to actually pay attention to this, because currently to date it has cost $10 million for North Dakota, and North Dakota is now using its resources to protect a private company. And the petroleum company doesn't have any liability to pay any of that back. So now North Dakota is stuck in the middle, and largely because they did not have the framework or the laws in place to allow for voices to be heard. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So it's the same if you're doing a greenway trail, right? So if you're going in and you have a long linear project, the easiest way for you to do that is not to come out with the project as a whole. You start to focus in key areas, right? So the Greenway Trail in Augusta, North Augusta, it's the same thing. You start with these pocket areas and then you build out from there. Well, the regulation currently allows pipelines to do that. That's what you're seeing in Dakotas. We had an incident in Pennsylvania not too long ago where these pipelines are being allowed to begin construction before they have all their permits in place. And then they're able to go back and say, oh, but we're so far down the road that it's almost built, so you've got to allow us to finish. That is wrong. That is taking that away from the public and from the private landowners that actually have a voice in that process. They should not be allowed to begin to build until their permits are in place. You really have, and before when we asked, as we were going through the process, we said, well, what happens if that farmer who's trying to now, you've cut off his timber track, so he has to drive those heavy trucks over that timber track. Say he does crush your line because it's eroded away and it's only 2 foot now to there. What happens? Who are you going to go after? Who's liable for that? The answer from the oil company is, well, we'll wait and see. So now you have landowners that are being forced to allow a pipeline to go through, who are then going to be liable when this pipeline explodes or leaks. That's not fair. That regulatory process needs to be tightened down. The burden of proof currently is now on landowners and on the state, not on the oil companies. The burden of proof needs to be on the oil companies. What I have found throughout the United States time and time again, and this last pipeline was no exception, that these pipeline companies are actually focusing in on these zones, conservation areas and state lands, because it's easier for them to gain access, which is so fundamentally backwards. Right? But the value, one, is cheaper. So we had, during this last pipeline, numbers of large tracts of land that were in conservation easement that were absolutely being focused on. They were cut through these cypress swamps, because cypress swamps, which are the kidneys and liver systems of the river, were actually easier and cheaper to gain access to. And so that is a very big problem for not only us, but for a lot of these land conservation groups, and for the landowners themselves. It's the same for the state land. So, for example, the last pipeline would have gone through Gopher Tortoise area that had been set aside by the state. We have to think about that. That is money that the state has given, that the taxpayers have said, we want to conserve and preserve this land. The idea of putting a pipeline through a Gopher Tortoise area is just absolutely absurd. Gopher Tortoise dig, that's what they do. So, but there is no requirement in Georgia that they don't go through those areas. And so I think that's really important, and I feel like it's the same for conservation banks. So if you go through a conservation bank, that is land that has already been given aside or rehabilitated because you've damaged somewhere else. And so when you damage that piece of property right there, you've lost in 2 different places. So we really have to be very careful with that regulation. And I wanted to, I'll end really quickly, and I really, this kind of, it does. It scares me, and I want to tell you, I am not a fan of civil disobedience. I'm just not. If I had, we probably would have had a lot more parades and other stuff going on last year. I don't think that's really, at the end of the day, how work should be done. But it is a growing thing that's happening throughout the United States. And in fact, just yesterday in Pennsylvania, a small town legalized civil disobedience, right? So that their people could start fighting some of the natural gas work that's going on. And that's not the move that we need to make. We need to make a move so that the citizens understand there are frameworks to move forward, but that you actually have a voice in that process.
Representative Williams, you said you don't want it running through the city of Hinesville. I don't want it running through my land. So we do agree on that. I don't know where to tell you to put it, but we don't have a shortage of fuel. And I hear about how much cheaper it is to transport it. The gas up here was more expensive on the route that I came than what I paid in Savannah when I filled up. So who's making the extra money that we allegedly saving? It ain't the consumers.
Eminent domain to me. It was like the president having the nuclear code. It should only be used when absolutely that's the only thing that you can do for the public well-being. Period. It shouldn't be driven by a company that wants to increase their stock, to increase profitability, because we have seen, you've seen it in history with companies. You've mentioned it about the company and the mercury coming down the Savannah River. I grew up around Augusta. CSRA is a great place. We have so many great natural resources. We don't need to allow those type of things to happen. And I can tell you that, again, I'm just using common sense. A company sends somebody on your land without permission. They're arrogant. They think they got it in the bag, and somebody may be getting something under the table. I don't know. But I can assure you that those that sat in this seat before you have done a great job of keeping our natural resources what they are in Georgia. And I hope my grandkids, your grandkids, and great-grandkids can enjoy the Woodpecker Trail, can enjoy the beaches, the marshes, without any environmental hazard.